I had a conversation with Miss Nishka, who spent majority of her life abroad.
Technically left India, I think, at the age of 2.5.
Okay.
Done schooling in 5 different systems.
She returned to India at two phases of her life and has been living in India since 2009.
Wanted to have children close to home. Close to, I would say, home meaning where my parents and where his parents are. It was harder for him to get used to, and I would say even till date there are things that he finds challenging about day-to-day things that he finds challenging. I think it becomes one of the hardest decisions to take because it's a very emotional one. You are taking a decision for somebody else and it can impact their life positively or negatively, and you don't know which way it's going to go. So as a mother, yes, as much as I've now spent maybe majority of my life in India now, I still remain a very much a global citizen. And
Yeah. She shares her journey and insights about kids' upbringing, life in India, career, and so on. We have a very active WhatsApp group where there's a lot of discussion happening on financial planning, logistics, kids' education, and much more. If you're interested to be part of this conversation and mingle with like minded people, please check out the link in the description below. So let's start a bit about your background and what made you to go abroad.
okay, so I actually left India, technically left India, I think, at the age of 2.5.
Okay.
My father was a government servant and worked with the Indian Foreign Service. So the way that his job was, it required him to sort of be posted outside and represent India in its sort of diplomacy abroad. So we lived in different countries. Every 3 years we would move, and that's what my childhood was about, all the way to high school. So my sister and I would travel with our parents, and every 3 years we sort of moved to a new country, new school, new friends, new cultures. So very much became what I like to term as global citizens.
Yeah.
Both Kanika, my younger sister, and I are very much remain even today global citizens. But I think one of the things that changed for me especially while I was in high school. I did my last 4 years of schooling in South Africa.
Okay.
And of course, a very large Indian diaspora, and that was true of most of the countries we lived in. We got to interact with a lot of the Indians some of them had migrated. In South Africa, there were Indians that had migrated almost 150, 200 years ago, and then they had become, culturally very different from, the Indians back home that we would interact with when we went back on holiday. And I think when you're in your teens, especially, high school years, you want to sort of find your identity and try to understand who you are. And I think I went through that phase in a very sort of strong manner. It kind of hit me in grade 9 or 10 when, uh, or even a little earlier, I would say in grade 7, I was in a French school at that time, and I was a little bit of a sort of unique case because I was the only Indian in that school for that
Okay.
year. I didn't speak any French, and I was going into this French school in a country called Angola in southern part of Africa, coastal Africa. And there is where I sort of started yearning to have an identity. And that identity I got really from, at that time, there was, the UN had representation there from different parts of the world, and the Indian army also had its forces based there. And a lot of the army officers we would interact with, they were my parents' social circle. So sort of my Indianness came out of identifying with these people, and I wanted to then I started yearning to go back home. And so after high school is when I chose to come back to India for university. So while my parents wanted me to go study in the US, I was in an American school. The natural track was to, take my SATs and go and do my undergrad in the US. But I sort of reversed that track and I came back to study in India and came back to Delhi, which is where my family was mostly based. And yeah, so that was my first one phase of my life where journey started, or returned to India to just
Yes.
find my identity. And I think I got very rooted as an Indian because when you do college in India, then that kind of teaches you all life's lessons and the reality of what it really means to live in India. So I've done that, and then I got the opportunity to live abroad again for over almost 10 years once I got married to my husband. So the two of Siddharth, my husband, had already lived in the US for 10 years before we got married.
Yeah.
And then once we got married, we took a conscious decision to move out of the US, but we lived in Europe
Yeah.
and the UK. And so we were there for about 7, 8 years, and then came back to India again to raise a family. So the journey has sort of been in spurts, childhood, and now a large part of my adulthood, the last 16 years, 17 years have been in India.
Great. No, truly global citizen. Like I think, in the several
I still
parts.
remain one, yes. As much as I've now spent maybe majority of my life in India now, I still remain a very much a global citizen. And
Yeah. So let's, I think, dive a little bit into the childhood. I think you mentioned, especially as a kid, going to different countries, different culture, every 3 years. How was it for you, like as a kid, with the culture change, with the languages? The reason I'm maybe specifically asking that is, on a flip side, when people move from abroad to India, I know it's a culture change. It's like just trying to understand as a kid, like what was going in your mind or how you adapted. So anything that you can share, and then we can touch about the university. Especially, this is also like some questions for people who are born abroad and who are non-US citizens, and kind of getting into colleges in India, how the admission process works. So if you can expand on those 2 points, I think that would be very helpful for a lot of these families who are considering to move to India, because that's another thing that they have in the back of the mind is kids adjustment, kids college, and so on.
absolutely. So I would say this, that I had parents who were very adventurous. I don't know if I, as a parent, am as adventurous. I think my generation of parents, we like to remain a little bit more in control. My parents, went with the flow of life and how things treated them. And they were none the worse for it. At that phase, if I recall, as a child, I used to find it very challenging. I was a very introverted child, very, very shy, very hard for me to make friends, very hard for me to kind of settle into a new environment. So I know that when we moved, it used to be the first few months of moving to a new country were really difficult. And I made life miserable, not just for myself, but also for my mother. I mean, she will go to all lengths to remind me of my childhood and of how I've made it so difficult for her. Um, so I know that it was never easy, but once I fit into that environment, I've done schooling in 5 different systems. I've done the French system, I've done the British system, I've done the American, I've done the International Baccalaureate, and I've done the Indian system, CBSE.
Yeah.
So I really, I've kind of done all of those as a student, and while going through it, transitioning from one to the other every time. When I look back, I used to, at that time I used to really feel bad for myself because I would be leaving schools, leaving teachers, leaving friends, and being a shy child, it was never easy to make the transition. Uh, in hindsight, when I look back, I really actually, when I started raising my children, I yearned for them to have that experience, because I, as an adult, really started valuing the experiences that I had had as a child. We from such a young age, we were exposed to so many different languages, so many different cultures, people, made me such an adaptable person. I can today live anywhere in the world really and feel at home.
Yeah.
I've been able to achieve that comfort level with the world at large, just because of the fact that I did this from such a young age. So I think I don't want to be advising people because it's all very individual, but I do feel from a child's perspective, if you look at it from their lens, it will never be very easy. They will come back to their parents with 100 reasons why they shouldn't move or why this or why that. But I feel children are so adaptable. I mean, I was not an easy, I think for me it was not easy, but I managed. And I think not just did I manage, I thrived.
Yes.
Every time I went into a new environment, the challenges, and I was able to overcome those challenges, settle in, make good friends, and that became sort of like an achievement, every few years. So, uh, in retrospect, as a parent, I would say if you have the opportunity, go for it, because I feel it will, give your children a sort of worldview or a perspective of life that is a skill that's really I would say an essential skill
Yeah.
in today's world. And if I talk about coming back for university when I came back, and I chose to come back to India instead of moving, to the Western world. Um, the I did everything from scratch, so my dad being a government servant, we were limited in our budget of even travel. So I took a flight on my own from South Africa, came back to Delhi University to apply for colleges. I was doing the IB system over there. And in those years, I'm talking now 25, I think 25 years ago is when I graduated. um, Today, you have international systems in India. People recognize these
Yes.
systems. There are children studying. My own children have done the IB. So, children, I mean, the parents and children and the educational system understands, all these various systems. In those days, that was not the case.
Yeah.
There was, sort of the Delhi University had an entrance exam that you had to take, and then your sort of report card was translated or converted into certain percentage that Delhi University or the university system here understood. Um, so of course, entrance exam happened, all of that, and then coming in, I think so I was fortunate to go to a college which did have some students similar to me who'd come from abroad. So I was at Lady Shri Ram, which was an all girls. My first experience of being in an all girls environment. I'd always studied in a multicultural co-ed educational system. So that was a first. But it was an amazing experience. Those 3 years, I think, is when I really found, at you're 17, 18, and then 3 years of your life with all these women aspiring to change the world, with professors who really are some of the best that the country has to offer. I got the opportunity to understand and live India.
Got
Um,
it.
that was, also a great experience. The transition academically was not really tough. From a system the kind that I came from, IB and American, it was fairly easy to transition into figuring out how to, and everyone was doing it because, even if you came from CBSE and ICSE, when you get into college, it's a very different environment. So you figure it out. Everyone's figuring it out at the same time. So it wasn't really very tough. It was very helpful though that I did know Hindi, that I could speak Hindi, because surviving Delhi without that at least would have been very challenging. So I think knowing the language was a plus for me. While at college it didn't really matter so much, but in your day to day, when you're
Yeah.
on the bus, when you're taking an auto, when you're going and buying something at a store, it really did help that I knew the language.
Got it. And then I know you mentioned about moving to US after getting married. So have you worked in India before getting married? Maybe you can spend, and then like how long you lived in US, and then you mentioned about a conscious decision to move to Europe. So maybe walk through us in terms of what was going on and what made you to move out of US and so on. So that would be helpful.
Right. So yes, I was very much working. I had finished my master's when I got married, and prior to that, I had worked 2 years in a media in a news channel called NDTV. So I came from I was very focused at that stage in my life of wanting to get into academia. After having been in the media, I wanted to get into doing a master's and then follow it up with a PhD. So at that phase, it seemed very apt to sort of move to the US right after my master's and then look at opportunities there. So when Siddharth and I got married, we decided that we would continue in the US. He still has had his job there, and he had just applied for his green card, in fact. So it was going to come through. But at the same time, he at that phase wanted to start his MBA.
Got
And so it was a toss between, do I do my MBA in the US or do I do it somewhere else? And um, as a couple, we at that time felt that, if we had stayed on in the US, for me at least, being on the H1B that I was on at that point, his, spouse, I would not have been able to work. So that was a limitation. And if he was going in to do his MBA, then continuing on that in case the green card didn't come through, was going to be something that was limiting from my career's perspective.
Yeah.
And for him also, he had lived in the US almost 10 years by that time. And, he'd been a student, he'd done his undergrad there, and then he'd stayed on to work. He'd sort of worked and seen enough, and he wanted a change. We were looking at that point, both of us. I had not lived in US beyond that 6 months or so.
Okay.
Um, but I had earlier taken the decision of not moving to the US, so it was not something that in my scheme of things, I was equally happy to do a master's or a PhD at that phase, even in the UK or elsewhere. And since I'd lived so many places, for me, I was very open to moving anywhere. And in fact, I was the one pushing it. So Siddharth happened to apply also to do his MBA at INSEAD, which is in France.
Yeah.
And one of the pushes was the fact that I had fluency in French, and I had the lived in Paris for a while. I lived in a couple of countries which were French speaking. So when that opportunity happened versus American MBAs, we took the call of doing the MBA at INSEAD. So we moved, to Europe because of the fact that right away for me to have gotten work would have been very tough. I didn't want to be at that stage of my life. I didn't want to take a break from my career. And for Siddharth, it was a way to explore a new continent, new region, build a network over there. So we moved to France.
Got it. So I'm assuming you haven't taken the green card. You just moved to France for the higher studies. Yeah.
Yes.
So how long you lived there in Europe, and and what changed, to move to India?
Yeah. So we were in France. That finished his MBA. Then we moved to the UK. So
Okay.
he got work in the UK. We both started in the UK then. We were living in London, and it's a very comfortable city to get used to start living in. A lot of our friends from INSEAD, also family. So it's kind of a very easy place to get used to, start liking. So we were there about 3 years, and everything seemed very settled. But we were coming to a phase in life when we were looking to start our family. And because of the kind of childhood I'd had, which it like I said to you, it was, as a child it was not easy. As an adult, in hindsight, I see it as a very positive environment. But as a child, I felt like I missed out on having having had to move so often, having had to make new friends every time, and having had to live away from grandparents and family and all of that.
Yeah.
So in my head, I had always, and this is something Siddharth and I had discussed even before we got married, in my head, I'd always wanted to have children close to home, close to, I would say, home, meaning where my parents and where his parents are.
Okay.
So at that stage, we took that conscious decision for the reason that we were thinking of wanting to start a family, and I did not really want to. I mean, it's a rare one, because a lot of people would, I know my kids joke about it, that we would have been British citizens and now we're not, because you guys didn't stay on, and so on. But it was
Yeah.
a decision we took because we wanted to start a family. What we did was a little bit off the beaten track also. Is we are both North Indian. Well, actually, we're East Indian. We're from Bihar, but a lot of our family is in Delhi,
Yeah.
in North India. So we would have, the ideal thing to have done would have been to move to Delhi.
Yeah.
But both of us felt, both from a career perspective as well as from the environment. By this time, Siddharth had not lived in India for almost 15 years.
Yeah.
Uh, and I had also been in and out in spurts. So I'd only spent 4 5 years of college and then work. So we decided that Delhi would be very overwhelming.
Mm.
Just too much, both an overdose of family and an overdose of everything else. And also from a career
Career.
opportunity perspective, there would be not as much. I could have gone back to my media journalism, so it would have been okay for me. But for Siddharth, he was in the tech space, and there was much less than there is today.
Yeah.
So we moved to Bangalore. And we felt that that was as good as getting as close to home as possible, and starting out again. So that's where our next move was, primarily because we wanted to kind of start a family.
Makes sense. And you haven't thought about any other places, even though you have lived in other places. So, but it's just like, being proximity to the family is the driving factor, and that made you to move to India.
For us, family, for when we wanted to have children. So
Yes.
we have we've led our lives in phases, and our phase of when we were initially starting out our career, it was great. I think having that global MBA for Siddharth really helped. It helped me to have gotten that global work experience, because when I came back, finding an opportunity in Bangalore also became equally easy. And then both of us, while in Bangalore, and while starting our family, we realized that in those days. Now, of course, there are that many more flights and the costs have also reduced. But flying from Bangalore to Delhi in those days
Yeah.
was almost as expensive as flying from London to Delhi.
Wow.
So, it was like a 20K fare, and the time taken to with the limited leave that you would have, it felt like it was again you were in a different world. So we did after our daughter was born, and our first child was born in Bangalore,
Yeah.
and soon after Sia was born is when we actually then chose to move to Delhi.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, because then the whole purpose of our coming back was really, like I said, the driving force was really family and wanting to raise our children around our family.
Got it. And you moved in 2009, just to put some context in terms of the timing, like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
2009. Oh, got it. And then, so are you currently based in Delhi or,
Yeah, so
yeah,
we have
okay.
since been in Delhi. We've raised two children here. We both our kids have done their schooling throughout in Delhi, in Gurgaon. Actually, we moved to from Bangalore to Gurgaon, and both Siddharth and I in 2020 started our entrepreneurial journey together. So we both were working in Delhi, Gurgaon. Siddharth went back to his family business. So he came to Delhi and started working with his family. I went back to a job. And then in 21, we both started Dresma together, which is the startup that we have.
Yeah. So let's, I think, talk about how was the life. 16 years is a long time. Especially you moved for, kids growing up close to family. How did it pan out, like career, global experience? So maybe how was the life in the last 16 years in India?
So I would split it into two, life for me and life for my husband.
Yeah.
I think Siddharth uh, is very rooted. His life was very different from mine. His childhood was very different. He lived in grew up for 18 years in Patna, and then he moved to the US for his undergrad, and then he worked in the US for 10 years, and then we were in Europe,
Yeah.
and then came back. So his for him, I think, because a lot of his adult life was spent outside of India, it was harder for him to get used to. And I would say even till date, there are things that he finds challenging about day-to-day things that he finds challenging about living in a place like Gurgaon, which is, I would say, a fairly sort of it's an aggressive city for people who've not been or lived in Delhi, Gurgaon. It can hit you hard a little bit. So Siddharth finds a little bit, for example, using public transport is a little challenging for him. Like having to always negotiate with the auto person. It's not that it's just now things have changed. Today it's very different. You take an Uber and everything is on your mobile. But I'm talking about maybe 12, 15 years ago, it was not as easy for him. Going to a park with your child, and you've got your child on a carrier, you're constantly being observed because they haven't, like a lot of people will stare at you, a lot of people look at you oddly. So he did feel a little bit of the cultural, I think, challenges. And he continues to some extent. For me, I think because I'd studied in India university,
Yeah.
it was much easier. I was much more comfortable with the language. I'd seen and done this. I'd used public transport. I'd run into government offices to get paperwork done. So those were the kind of things that I think he found more challenging. But the advantage with Gurgaon for both of us was that it's a very, again, to a large extent, it's a moving populace. So a lot of people coming in were also well traveled like us. A lot of people coming in had seen the world, worked abroad for phases of their life. So it was easy to sort of find people like so that was one very big advantage of Gurgaon, say, versus if we had lived in Delhi.
Yeah.
uh, you so settling in, both by virtue of making friends and by virtue of having family around, was easy to that respect. Day to day life was a bit challenging, but it's gotten, over the years, things have improved so much now, that I think, and we've also been here that long, that we've gotten used to it.
Makes sense. And let's talk about the kids. I think now, I think you mentioned they were in IB curriculum. Like, I don't know which grade they were in, like, and
So my
so
older one
how
is
was it?
now in college. In fact, she's in the US, much against our wanting her to go, but it was her choice. We wanted her to explore Europe and the UK because we lived in both those parts of the world, and for us, both Siddhartha and I have a soft corner for Europe. So we were very keen that she try it out in her young adulthood, but she was very clear she wanted to be in North America. So she's in the US for university. My younger one is finishing her IB now. So for them, I mean, they are Indian for all purposes. I mean, they grew up here. They didn't know anything different. They would travel a lot abroad. They have a lot of family abroad, especially in the US. So, our summers were always spent in California. And both my girls, sort of when they compared their life with the life of their cousins, they always felt like, oh, we should have been living in California. Why are we not there? And a little bit, especially as girls, I would say, because you'll become a little more sheltered here in especially in the NCR, I would say, with just the way security can be, especially for women. So they wouldn't get as much of a opportunity to be as free with using public transport, with being on the streets later in the evening, as they could be elsewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe if they'd lived in Bombay or Bangalore, it would have been different. But in NCR, that was a bit of a limitation to an extent. So they felt, therefore, I think they are a little more curious. So they're on the other side of the story. They now both are looking at going abroad, exploring, seeing what there is, and then, deciding what they do with their lives.
Got it. And then in terms of the curriculum, like, have you always been keen on, having them in IB? So
Yeah.
was there any contemplation between different curriculums, and how did you go about it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and that was an easy one for me. I know it's one that a lot of parents struggle with, especially parents who've not had exposure to global educational systems. I know I became the advisor to a lot of my friends. We chose an ICSC school for them because it happened to be the best school in Gurgaon academically at that point when they got admission. However, fortunately, that school always also offered IB
Okay.
as an option in the 11th, 12th. And the switch is made in class 6. In class 6, they did IGCSE, which is the
Yes.
Cambridge system, the
Yeah.
British, and then they moved to IB. So in class 5, we had to take the decision. And I remember for a lot of parents, it was very challenging to decide which way or the other. But for us, I had been able to transition back to India from IB. So I was of the view that even if they choose to want to stay back in India, it will not be very challenging for them. I mean, I think in hindsight, it's challenging if you want to do, say, engineering or medicine, because IB in itself is a very intensive program, and then preparing for engineering or medicine also equally
Involved.
is, strenuous. So I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't have, I would have made my children switch in class 10 if that's the track, but neither of them wanted that track. They were very clear they wanted to study abroad and not appear for the Indian entrances by the 10th. So IB was a very good choice for them. I think it prepares you for, because of my personal experience, Siddharth didn't have that experience. So he was very open to them studying any curriculum. In my scenario, I felt it prepares them very well for education anywhere, and especially in America. I mean,
Got
I
it.
think my older one settled very easily into the American system without having ever studied abroad, primarily because she came from the IB system.
No, thanks for sharing that. So let's switch gears a little bit on the career side. I know initially the plan was to go to Bangalore from a career perspective before, having the family. How easy was it to find the jobs with the global experience? That's one aspect. And, especially for Siddharth, who never worked in India till then, the career, like work-life balance, office politics, the environment, like how was it for the initial few years? So if you can talk on the career, like the transition in the initial stage, and then maybe how did you decide about moving to Delhi? I know the reason was for the family, but also the careers. I think the opportunities are minimal, but there was a conscious decision of giving up on something while moving to Delhi. Like, if you can talk through that.
Right. So both Siddharth and I were fortunate enough to be able to, when we were leaving London, to be able to interview for and get jobs prior to coming into Bangalore. So
Okay.
we already had jobs in our hand. I think, yes, it did for both of us, it helped that Siddharth, being in the tech space, it was a great time to be coming back. There were a lot of these small startups that were starting out. He actually joined a company by the name of Itium, which was a small consulting startup based out of Bangalore, but selling to the US. So his experience and exposure abroad became his advantage.
Yeah.
And fortunately for him, the founders of the organization were also seasoned people in the tech sector who had lived in the US and then come back to set up in India.
Yeah.
So they came from a very global mindset, the team that was working. So I think he had that advantage starting out for him. But having said that, as that organization grew, I think he did start feeling, what you talked about, the cultural difference, I think, between India and the US. One of the things that has been big in that in Siddharth's experience, at least that he's shared with me, and we have seen it also firsthand with Dresma, has been the interaction with your juniors. When you in companies that Siddharth started out in the US, you're given a lot more of a free hand or a lot more responsibility when you're starting out, even as a fresher, when you come in your first job. There is a lot of onus on you to do the things that to achieve your deliverables. In India, even till date, I think a lot of that hand-holding happens by your manager even now. And that is a big, for Siddharth, that was a challenging challenge when he had to start managing teams. When he came into positions where he was managing kids coming out of some of the best institutes in India, he felt that they weren't prepared very well for the workforce. And I think he came from the background that he'd done his undergrad in the US, and he felt that his US education prepared him better for the workforce and for being able to even take up cultural and work challenges in India, then an Indian education system, college education system, was preparing kids out of IITs and out of sort of regional technical universities in India. So that was an observation, and that something we've now consistently observed, and that's something that we feel very strongly that there should be something we as our generation of,
Yeah.
of people, people like you and me and whoever else, and there are many who are doing things to contribute towards this. But I think that shift really has to happen. I mean, Indians thrive wherever they go, but in their own environment, I don't know whether it's the way that we are culturally. It's that we like that. We get spoon fed or we get directed. We don't, or that if we are not and we're given a free hand, it's not appreciated. I don't know what it is, but that's something that we observed in the space that I was in. I got into training and communications. I came from the media background. In training and communication, I felt I had a huge advantage having lived and worked
Global.
abroad. We were working primarily with corporates, and I would be working with very well traveled CEOs and senior management, and it really helped that I came with that global perspective. I think that really helped me. So in my career, it was a huge advantage. In Siddharth's in the IT sector, I think he felt like uh, things weren't as developed as it seemed to be from the outside. When you come back and you at that time, Bangalore, everyone was talking about Bangalore, and you had the best talent of India sitting in Bangalore. But his experience was that even the best there still didn't compare to the kind of experiences or the kind of challenges that were put forth to the best in the US.
Got it. And then in terms of moving to Delhi, so Siddharth has switched from corporate world to his own family business. Is that okay? Yeah, the transition happened there.
That was, of course, a very different. So his family business is a very traditional cement manufacturing business, nothing to do with his professional background. But it was something that he took a conscious decision of wanting to move to that. He did that for about 10 years of his life. That was the time when his family needed him to be back in the business, so he did it. And it was there. It was, you were dealing with government, you were dealing with sort of bureaucrats, the experience that he, of course, never had before professionally. So those came with their own set of challenges. But I mean, it was something that I think, inevitably known of, because he was raised in that environment. He'd spent those many years in Bihar, and he, as a child, was aware that at some point he would maybe want to make that transition and experience that as well.
Got it. And then, yeah, let's talk about your entrepreneur journey. Like, I think, from a corporate world to this journey.
2022. So I had transitioned into working. So I was in corporate training for almost 15, 16 years. and then there was a point when I got the opportunity to switch. This is, I was raising the kids, and I wanted a break from my hectic life, but I didn't want to stop my career. So Siddharth's family used to run sort of like a body shopping company. So it was like a KPO where they were outsourced. It was an offshore business for image editing. So a lot of Photoshop work that was required by large companies like National Geographic were being shipped to India,
Yeah.
to be done. And so I got involved in that business. And then that business I took over, and it evolved into a business that essentially was doing high-end post-production for a lot of large retailers across US and Europe. My clients were both mostly based in US and Europe. So my entrepreneurial journey sort of started technically in a family business like that. But there is where I saw a lot of gaps. I saw a lot of opportunity. It was entire process of doing it essentially was very sort of labor intensive.
Yeah.
And the only advantage that we had sitting out of India was that there was access to cheaper labor here. Um, and I started speaking to Siddharth, and in my company, I had a person who was CEO of that company, Abhishek and I. So Abhishek and I were working closely, and we felt there was a lot of opportunity to sort of, make this more tech enabled.
Yeah.
And Siddharth, coming from a product tech background, we felt we were kind of sharing our experiences with him and showing him gaps here and asking him to give us ideas. And that's sort of the start of Dresma. In 2019, we started conversations. 2020, we started building. And we fully migrated out of that company. Abhishek and I, we left that company, and we joined Siddharth together, and the three of us started Dresma. So we saw an opportunity, we saw a problem that our customers we felt could work for the kind of customers we were serving, and that's how Dresma came about. Came about at a bit of an odd time because it was COVID, hit us very soon after we started. But interestingly, we raised our seed round during COVID from an American VC. So it was also a very interesting journey as entrepreneurs. By that time, a lot had opened up. India was sort of booming, a lot of startups coming up. The space was a very interesting space to be in at the time that we got into it. Continues to be very exciting space. So very smooth for us. I mean,
Yeah.
fortunately, I would say, and I think it really helped. Mine and Siddharth's experience of having lived and worked in the US really helped in being able to, just like even as simple as the paperwork involved in registering your company in the US, getting legal help, taxes, all of that. It became very easy because we had some understanding and background of that already.
Great. Makes sense. All the best with the company. Sounds exciting, and I think wish you all the best. So maybe to wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to bring for people who are thinking about moving to India, or any advice that you want to share from your perspective?
So I'll share a mother's advice, because I think, like professionally and personally, it's a decision that, if people have to take based on where they are in their lives. As parents, I think it becomes one of the hardest decisions to take, because it's a very emotional one. You are taking a decision for somebody else, and it can impact their life positively or negatively. And you don't know which way it's going to go. So as a mother, my advice would be that we should do what we think is best for us. I mean, it sounds selfish, but I think children are the most adaptable beings there are, and if they're not, they should be. Therefore, at whatever phase of life, if you're choosing to come back to India or move abroad, whatever be the case, don't do it for your children.
Yeah.
Do it for yourself. Make it a decision that this is going to, impact my career, my personal life in a certain way, and it's my decision for myself. The impacts on your children are, uh, I mean, they have a long life, and they will make their own decisions, and they will make their own mistakes, and it's this decision doesn't impact them positively or negatively in any way. The way I feel is not going to have a long lasting impact on them. I think that phase of school is a phase that children go up through ups and downs in them, and they come out of it. They
Yeah.
all do, and some take longer, some take less time. But I think let it be your own decision as a parent, as a mother, for yourself rather than for them. And I did it for myself. My children often have said, "Oh, you were so selfish. You were so that." But in hindsight, they've had the privilege of growing up with surrounded by four of their grandparents, surrounded by uncles and aunts, surrounded by people who love them. They are very secure in the people that they are today.
Yeah.
Both my two daughters are extremely secure people. They are happy to travel the world. They're happy to come back and live in India. They're very open to what life will throw to them.
Yeah.
And, uh, you know, uh, and they're risk takers. I mean, they've seen their parents take chances and risks in their life, and they're open to doing the same. So, kids learn from experiences. They learn from seeing and
Yes.
observing. So as parents, that is the best we can give them. We should do what we think are decisions for ourselves, and their decisions will happen on their own.
I think the key thing is they're so adaptable. I think we underestimate how adaptable they are, and they learn through their own means. I think, yeah. I think
Absolutely,
just seeing it.
absolutely. And they make the most of all their circumstances, whatever's thrown at them.
Yes, for sure. And you are a living example. Like, you've been through like different countries and like how you adapted and you become a global citizen. I think it's just a good representation. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you sharing your story and journey with us. A lot of different perspectives. You as a kid growing up abroad, as well as, you spending in the last 16 years and moving for the family, and how it has been in terms of the career, in terms of the you and your husband, a lot of interesting information. So thanks a lot again for taking the time and sharing with us today.